Hello and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Adrian Peterson and produced in the studios of shortwave station WRMI in Okeechobee, Florida. I'm Jeff White. Today on Wavescan, tribute to shortwave WYFR, Part 13, A Historic Era Comes to an End. Our special QSL of the week is the Russian Jammer. And we'll have international DX news today on Wavescan. Well, in our continuing series of progressive topics on the long and illustrious history of one of America's earliest and largest shortwave stations, we pick up the story again at a time of change in ownership. The station that was on the air consecutively under the primary call signs W2XAL, W1XAL, WSLA, WRUL, and WNYW now becomes the very familiar WYFR. And that was in the year 1973. This is what happened, as Ray Robinson explains.
Thanks, Jeff. Back in the year 1959, Harold Camping, together with two other colleagues, purchased an FM station in San Francisco, California, whose history dated back to 1947. This station was originally inaugurated by Warner Brothers of motion picture fame, and it was listed under the original call sign KWBR on 97.3 MHz. During the 12 intervening years, the station underwent several changes in ownership and call sign, and when it was procured by Harold Camping and his partners in 1959, it was known as KOBY-FM, listed as 82 kilowatts and still on the same channel, 97.3 MHz. The station was taken over under its new owners, Family Stations Inc., on February the 4th, 1959, and was given a new call sign, KEAR. Subsequently, the number of radio and TV stations owned by Family Radio grew over a period of time into a network of more than 100 stations, including translators or low-power relays. In addition, their programming was also distributed via several satellite channels. In an endeavour to increase the coverage area of their radio programming worldwide, Family Radio began to look towards the possibility of broadcasting on shortwave. Initially, they took out a program relay over shortwave station WNYW with studios in New York and transmitters at Hatherley Beach, Scituate, in Massachusetts. Their new schedule of programming over shortwave WNYW was implemented on January the 22nd, 1972, with 3 program hours leased daily. At the time, WNYW was on the air with 3 or 4 transmitters in parallel, which provided very broad coverage of the Americas, Europe, and Africa. At the same time, Family Radio began negotiating with Bonneville International in Salt Lake City, Utah, the then owners of WNYW, to purchase this historic and well-known shortwave station in Scituate, Massachusetts. And so thus it was that Family Radio announced on Friday, October the 19th, 1973, that they were acquiring this East Coast shortwave station. And the very next day, Saturday, October the 20th, the station began their broadcast day using a new call sign, WYFR. In reminiscing about these events, WYFR engineering manager Dan Elia recalls that the previous staff with WNYW gave the new staff with WYFR just 1 hour on the Friday evening to become familiar with the operations of all of the electronic equipment at this large shortwave station. On the first day of operation as WYFR, just 2 transmitters were employed with twin programming services in English and Spanish to Europe and Latin America. The first printed transmission schedule was issued by WYFR a few weeks later in November 1973, and it shows they were then on the air for a little over 9 hours daily with similar programming in English and Spanish beamed to Europe and Latin America. 4 transmitters were on the air, and they were heard on all of the international shortwave bands ranging from 5 MHz up to 21 MHz according to propagation conditions. A total of 9 rhombic antennas were in use, 4 of which were reversible. At the time of the 1973 transfer of ownership, WNYW-WYFR was on the air with a complement of 4 shortwave transmitters and call signs. The primary 2 transmitters were 100 kilowatt Harris model HF100s with call signs WMYW2 and WMYW3. Just outside the control room on a raised platform was the third transmitter, a 50 kilowatt Harris model HF50C with call sign WMYW4, and in a back room in what had originally been a coal bunker was the fourth transmitter, a 50 kilowatt Continental model 417B with call sign WMYW5. At this stage in 1973 there was no transmitter identified as WMYW1. It would appear that transmitter, WMYW1, was an earlier 20 kilowatt auxiliary unit that had been removed from service. During the following year, 1974, an additional 100 kilowatt transmitter was installed, a Continental model 418D. This unit was already planned and licensed under WMYW ownership, and it was installed somewhat nearby to the two Harris 100 kilowatt transmitters, though at right angles to them. We might mention also that the 50 kilowatt Harris unit at WMYW had originally been intended in 1967 for installation at ELWA near Monrovia in Liberia, where Dan Elliott began service 3 years later. However, after the disastrous fire at WMYW in 1967, this unit was taken over for WMYW, and another was subsequently provided for the African shortwave station. Soon after Family Radio took over the WMYW facility at Hatherley Beach, they began planning for a new shortwave station which was ultimately established at Okeechobee in Florida.
Hola, bienvenidos a la programación diaria de Family Radio. Estamos transmitiendo el mensaje de paz de nuestro Señor Jesucristo. Y ahora, para llevar a nuestros pensamientos e ideales a lo que realmente cuenta en la vida, damos comienzo a nuestro programa de hoy.
When the huge new facility in Florida was readied, the transmitters at Hatherley Beach were removed one by one, taken to Okeechobee and reinstalled. For a period of 2 years, shortwave station WYFR was on the air from both locations simultaneously, in Massachusetts and Florida. The first transmitter at Hatherley Beach to be removed and reinstalled at Okeechobee was the new 100 kilowatt Continental 418D, which had recently been installed under WYFR. That was at the end of 1977. Then each of the remaining Hatherley Beach units in turn was removed from service and reinstalled at Okeechobee. The final broadcast from WYFR Hatherley Beach ended at 20:52 UTC on November the 17th, 1979. That broadcast was beamed to Africa over a 50 kilowatt transmitter on 21525 kHz. When that transmitter was removed, the Hatherley Beach Situate transmitter station was silenced forever, at the end of its 60 years of illustrious service. A visitor to the historic site in 1993 described it as abandoned and covered with overgrowth, though now it has been redeveloped as an upscale housing area. Shortwave WYFR was always a reliable verifier of reception reports from listeners, and this was true right from the beginning at Hatherley Beach, though the office at Oakland, California was the location from which the QSL cards were issued. At least 3 different QSL cards verifying WYFR at Hatherley Beach are known. 2 different printings of the card showed microphones and the station call sign in large red lettering. A third card is similar in design, though instead of microphones, a silhouette of tall buildings is shown. Back to you, Jeff.
Well, I say the fun has just begun. We're at food deck number 1. We're flying through outer space in a rock and rolling pace. Hey, we're gonna get our kicks on a little old thing called a spoon nigger. Spoon, spoon, Sputnik and Chip. This is Sputnik and Chip. This is Spoot.
Johnny Engler's 1957 hit song Sputnik. It was about the Sputnik 1 satellite, launched by the Soviet Union on October 4th, 1957. Sputnik 1 was the world's first artificial satellite, about the size of a beach ball and weighing only 84 kilograms. Sputnik took about 98 minutes to orbit the Earth on its elliptical path. That launch ushered in new political, military, technological, and scientific developments. The Sputnik launch marked the start of the space age and the U.S.-USSR space race. Now, 57 years later, Sputnik is back, but not as a satellite, as a radio station. This past Monday, November 10th, the Voice of Russia, formerly Radio Moscow, was renamed again, rebranded, the Russians call it, as Radio Sputnik. Vasily Strelnikov, who produces a program for the station, alerted us to the name change.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Radio Sputnik News.
Hello and welcome to the news from Moscow. My name is Evgeny Golovin. Moscow hopes that all information about the crash of the Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 in eastern Ukraine will be made public. The Russian president has told the Australian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin and Tony Abbott have had a brief meeting on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Beijing.
In announcing the launch of Radio Sputnik, the U.S. Voice of America referred to it as a name with connotations of the Cold War. Russian authorities say that in 2015, Sputnik will broadcast in 30 languages with over 800 hours of radio programming a day, covering over 130 cities and 34 countries via local radio stations, as well as on the Internet. The government media outlet Rossiya Segodnya says that Sputnik's content is designed for a global audience who are tired of aggressive propaganda promoting a unipolar world and want a different perspective. Unlike Radio Moscow and the Voice of America, Sputnik's broadcasting is entirely geared toward local audiences. Almost all of the radio programs and websites will be developed locally. It is absolutely clear to us that trying to broadcast in foreign languages and win over foreign audiences from Moscow is not a productive approach, Rossiya Segodnya editor-in-chief Margarita Simonyan said. Journalists who work in Moscow are not in a position to understand local realities, as well as the locals themselves, nor will they be able to invite local newsmakers and experts to their studios. In every country where it operates, Sputnik will have a multimedia center complete with a radio station for local audiences, a website, a news agency that produces exclusive content, and a press center. Each of Sputnik's multimedia centers has anywhere from 30 to 100 staff, and all are local professionals. Sputnik's radio broadcasting will use modern formats, such as digital DAB, DAB+, that's digital radio broadcasting, HD radio, as well as FM radio, mobile phones, and the Internet. In the medium term, the goal is to broadcast around the clock. Many countries offer to let us broadcast Sputnik programs using local FM radio stations, Simonyan said. They are interested in having new content in their media market and will include our programming in their broadcasts. Sputnik news feeds in English, Spanish, and Arabic are available around the clock. A newscast in Chinese will become available in late 2014. These products are distributed by subscription and cater to professional media and business, as well as expert and government agencies. Regional editorial offices in Washington, Cairo, Beijing, and Montevideo work 24/7. Sputnik's photo service uses a worldwide network of photojournalists. Images will be stored on a single database to allow for rapid sharing between regional centers. The future of Moscow's international shortwave service is still up in the air. There were rumors that the Voice of Russia, which ended shortwave broadcasts last year, would return to shortwave during the current B-14 season. And indeed, Russian authorities registered many frequencies for the Voice of Russia for this season. But so far, there's nothing on the air. And now the Voice of Russia has become Radio Sputnik. Despite the assertion that all programming will be local, Radio Sputnik is so far broadcasting on the Internet former Voice of Russia programs like From Moscow with Love. So it will be interesting to watch what happens with this new radio and multimedia service in the coming months. By the way, the same day that Sputnik was launched, the international news channel CNN said it will not be available to Russian cable TV providers beginning next year. The Associated Press said CNN's decision apparently had to do with a new media law in Russia passed in October that limits foreign media ownership in Russia to 20%.
Greetings to shortwave enthusiasts around the world. This is Bob Padula in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, with another edition of the Australian DX Report. These magazines provide news of shortwave broadcasting stations, monitoring summaries, propagation news, and other information concerning world international broadcasting. As I start to remind you that full detailed QSLs are available for correct reports received for these episodes. The address will be given at the end of the program. And to note that all times, days and dates given in our episodes are in UTC, and we use the 24-hour time system. The episodes are compiled from resources made available by the Electronic DXpress Radio Monitoring Association, which is based here in Melbourne. Our program lineup this time includes propagation report, solar activity news, information about new frequencies for international broadcasting stations, and some monitoring notes made here in Melbourne. First of all, solar activity report from the Ionospheric Prediction Service in Sydney, New South Wales here in Australia. The IPS reports that activity is now rated as high after a period of several weeks when it was low. The 10.7 centimetre solar flux is 135, that's 135, and the daily equivalent smooth sunspot number has been around 89, that's 89. And those figures are not likely to change significantly in the immediate future. So it just means that we'll continue to enjoy better high-frequency propagation on frequencies above about 15 megahertz on darkness and semi-darkness paths. That's propagation by multi-hop modes on a worldwide basis. Frequencies above about 15 megahertz on daylight paths will be quite good. So high frequencies continuing to improve, and it's noted that we're still in the plateau of solar or sunspot cycle number 24. So the new cycle is expected to start very soon. We're not quite sure when, but it will be overlapping with the present cycle. Now, some shortwave monitoring notes. The B14 shortwave schedule season started recently. Hundreds of frequency changes have been made by international broadcasters in an attempt to establish interference-free channels. And these notes, which I will now give you, denote reception here in Melbourne, which is a sample of new frequency usage in recent days. First of all, the 49 metre band. Morning reception around the Melbourne sunrise period includes the following: 5865 Radio Fardar from Iranawilla in Sri Lanka, that's the IBB relay station in Persian, at 1900. Just up from there, the frequency of 5875, the Voice of America from Penang in the Philippines, with Korean, also at 1900. 5895 Radio France International from Issoudun with its Russian language programs at 1900. And 5910 the BBC from the Oman relay station with programming in Dari at 1800. 5950 Korean Broadcasting System from Seoul using the relay station in French at Issoudun with programming in French signing on at 2000. and 5990 Radio Romania International in Romanian at 1800, and also Radio Romania International in German on 6010 at 1900. And the Voice of Vietnam from the Wolferton relay station in England using 6135, noted with Russian between 2000 and 2030. And a new frequency for the Voice of the Islamic Republic of Iran is 6140, with broadcast in Bosnian from 1800 to closing at 1820. And 6175, another frequency for the Voice of Vietnam, this time from Dubai in the UAE in German, signing on at 2030. And Iran, another frequency for the Bosnian service, that's 6205 to signing off at 1820. And a large concentration of international stations using the 49 metre band, mainly for evening reception in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. However, the 41 metre band is not so densely populated, but some signals noted recently included 7215 China Radio International from the Serik relay station in Albania with Arabic at 2105, and 7475 Radio Liberty from the Aranavilla relay station in Sri Lanka in Russian at 1920, and 7365 the Voice of the Islamic Republic of Iran in Japanese, signing on at 2050. That's the morning service to Japan. Now we move up into the higher frequency bands, and we note the following. First of all, 16 metres and 13 metres. 17560 Saudi Arabia, broadcast in Arabic at 1600. That's a rather late time period, and that transmission actually, or propagation, is via the short path coming into Melbourne from the west over the daylight path. And 1600 is 3 a.m. here in Melbourne, about an hour before sunrise. 17895 the Voice of America continues to use the relay facilities provided on an exchange basis by Vatican Radio at Santa Maria di Galleria, English at 1615. And in the 13 metre band we have some interesting activity. 21470 the BBC from Dubai in the UAE in Somali at 1445. 21505 Saudi Arabia in Arabic at 1450, and 21540 Radio Kuwait in Arabic at 1445. And two frequencies in the 19 metre band, 15335 Bible Voice Broadcasting Station from the Usedom relay station in France with African languages at 1750, and 15725 Radio Pakistan with its external service in Urdu also at 1750. So it's quite a lot of activity on the bands, and while not all bands are audible in all parts of the world at all times, but that's what I've just given you as a representation of some of the changes or frequency changes that have been taken into use for the new transmission season.
As our special QSL for the week, we present the story of another QSL card verifying the reception of a jamming transmission as heard on shortwave, this time from Radio Moscow. At the time, our DX editor, Adrian Peterson, was living in Pune, India, and in those days a multitude of Russian jamming transmitters could be heard on all of the international shortwave bands. On May 2nd, 1984, Adrian's radio receiver was tuned to 11,870 kilohertz, and he heard one of these jamming transmitters. It would appear that this jammer was aimed at covering the programming from a 250 kilowatt BBC transmitter on Ascension Island in the Atlantic Ocean. In that era, Adrian Peterson was sending many reports to Radio Moscow for verification of their many different transmitter sites, and he enclosed a report on the Russian jamming transmission together with several other reports on their regular program broadcasts. In due course, a QSL card was received from Radio Moscow verifying the 11870 kHz transmission, a picture card showing a main thoroughfare in Moscow known as Kalinin Prospect, though these days it is known as New Arbat Avenue. The World Radio TV Handbook for 1984 lists a Russian transmitter on 11870 kHz with regular programming, though the specific location is not known. And we end today's edition of Wavescan with some music from Mexico. This is the Marimba Orquesta Reina Tuxtleca. Thanks for listening to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written in Indianapolis by Adrian Peterson. Next week, the news you're waiting for, the results of our big Focus on Asia annual DX contest for the year 2014, rare, unusual, unique QSLs. Also, our Australian DX report. Several QSL cards are available for your reports on this program. Send your AWR and KSDA reception reports for Wavescan to the AWR address in Indianapolis, and also to the station your radio is tuned to, WRMI or WWCR or KVOH, or to the AWR relay stations that carry Wavescan. Remember, too, you can send a reception report to each of the DX reporters when their segment is on the air here in Wavescan: Japan, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Australia, and India. They will verify with a colorful QSL card. Return postage and an address label are always appreciated. Our Wavescan address is Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. Our email address is wavescan@awr.org. That's wavescan@awr.org. I'm Jeff White at WRMI in Miami this week. Till next time, good listening, everyone.